So now the U.S. has been allowed to use, I'll show the smaller map, you can see it a little better. In that region of Turkey, which is the Kurdish region, sort of just north of Syria, Iraq, and west of Iran, they have a couple of air bases, and the U.S. has been allowed to use these air bases to bomb inside Syria. And for that, it's given Turkey some diplomatic support. Now, Turkey has about 80 million people. There's a population of 80 million. The territory is slightly bigger than Texas, and it reaches from the tip of the end of Europe in the Balkans all the way to Iran in West Asia. Turkey has a big army. It's part of NATO. It's been part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that the U.S. is the dominant force in since 1952. After its armed forces intervened under U.S. command against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea during what the U.S. calls the Korean War. And Washington now sends more military aid to Turkey's armed forces than to any other countries except Israel and Egypt. Okay. And here's U.S. and Germany arms Turkey. As you see, Turkey participated as a U.S. ally in wars against Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and here they're bombing Kurds in the Kurdish region. This is inside Iraq, I think. Okay. Wait a minute. Now, the biggest opposition, the biggest movement that has been confronting the Kurdish government over the last 30 years or so has been the Kurdish movement. There's been a Kurdish movement for self-determination. Excuse me?
You said opposition to the Kurdish government?
To the Turkish government, I'm sorry. The Turkish nationalism, to the government. The Kurdish people make up about 18 to 20% of the population of Turkey. It's a large part of the population, and they're integrated throughout all of Turkish society. And they play a big role in organizations that are multinational, that Turkish and Kurdish revolutionary organizations inside, the areas, the big cities in Turkey too. But there's also has been a Kurdish movement that's strictly Kurdish in their regions that has been organized by what they call the PKK, the Workers' Party of Kurdistan, which for many years was a Marxist-Leninist movement. Right now, for the last few years, it has no longer been asking for separation, for a completely separate state. And from 2013, the last couple of years, it was negotiating with this with the current government, but it has been carrying on also a guerrilla war. The next few pictures are of PKK guerrillas. As you'll notice, a lot of them are women. So women play a very active role in the force, and I think they get photographed even more. But there is, it's not make-believe. It's not just a little bit on the side. They're a big part of the force, the women. Let me see where I'm at. Okay, the guerrillas. Now, this is Erdogan. He's the president. The AKP is his party, Justice and Progress Party. He's been in the government. He's been either prime minister, or the last couple of years he's been elected president. Prime minister is a more powerful figure usually, although he's been trying to make president like a president of the United States, a more powerful figure, and more powerful office. They were elected first in 2001. They were the first religious-based government of Turkey. They're from like a Islamic Brotherhood-based party. They're Sunni. Because the original Turkish nationalist movement was a secular movement in the 1920s. in 1910s and 1920s, and all along there have been the government and the military has been secular, has not been religious based. So this was the first religious government to come in, and they thought he was going to. He had some support in the Kurdish region because he was negotiating with the PKK. But in recent electoral struggles, there's Öcalan. Öcalan is the head of the PKK. He's been in jail. He's been in prison in Turkey since 1999. But lately he's been negotiating, but not the last few months. They stopped negotiations, and the Turkish government is waging war on the PKK again. What happened, though, that sort of threw the thing into a turmoil was there was an election in June. There is a party inside Turkey now that's a left progressive party. We could call it a social democratic party, although everything's much more activist than you think of it. They're not just an electoral party. They're a coalition of left organizations with a lot of support in the Kurdish regions. And they ran, and for the first time in a national election, got more than 10% of the vote last June. See, Erdogan was trying to manipulate the election so his party would get 60% of the vote. They could change the constitution, and he could become a president, which is a powerful president, probably one for life. But instead, this party, the HDP, the People's Democratic Party, got 13% of the vote. They got 79 seats, and they reduced the leading party to less than 50% of the votes, which not only he didn't get his 60%, he didn't even get 50%, he couldn't form a new government. They couldn't form a new government. So there's going to be a new election on November 1st. I mean, the election will be, as you can tell from what's going on, the election may be important, but it doesn't decide what happens. The decisions are being made on the street and the military and fighting and stuff like that. So, part of what the left suspects the government is doing, and you can see the reason for it, is they're trying to sow such a feeling of chaos and insecurity amongst the population that they vote for the government sort of out of despair, or they don't go to vote at all, so that the government wins back its majority and they can push it through. And that's why they suspect that the government is behind, or at least allowing these kind of attacks to happen in the street. So there are other parties too, including the little brownish colored one on the right. That's there's a fascist party called the Nationalist Movement Party, which are also called the Grey Wolves. You might have heard that name from the past, because this is the, I thought I had them later on. But these are the two chairs of the progressive, the organization, the HDP. And they have co-chairs. So they have a man and a woman. They make a point of showing women. The 31 of the 79 people who elected were women. And their campaign is very much pro-working class, for unity of the working class, for defense of the different minorities, because there's a lot of small minorities, religious and ethnic minorities in Turkey. So that's been the program of this left Social Democratic Party, which, I mean, you might think it's something like Syriza in Greece, except that the struggle is so much they're in the streets and people are killing each other in Turkey, and there's guerrilla war going on, and the government is making war against the Kurdish population. So the situation is in a different way. Even the ones that like these people, well, you'll see. These are the Grey Wolves. And you see, it's a fascist, it's a mass organization. It's not just the police, although there's probably a lot of Grey Wolves among the police in Turkey. I'll get to this later. Okay. Now, what had boosted the mood inside the class struggle and in the electoral struggle in Turkey before the June elections this year was that in this the Turkish area of Syria, which was, there was a city called Rojava, which was under attack by the Islamic State. And the local Kurdish organizations and the PKK went in and defended it, and they had a military victory. So that raised the mood over there. And there was a lot of support for them, but they were going to rebuild the city. There was a movement of youth in Turkey, of all the progressive youth that were going over there, and then there was a bomb set off in the city Surus, I think it's called, in the south, right near the Syrian border, and about 30 young people were killed. Here are some of the people. I don't like to show bloody pictures, but these are the pictures of some of the people who were killed, just so you get an idea. And here's the picture I showed before about in Ankara, as I said, in Surus, after this bombing took place, Erdogan used it as a pretext to arrest 1,300 people, saying he was arresting the bombers, Islamic State. But really, only 140 of them were not leftists. Of the 1,300 people that he arrested, he mainly arrested leftists and Kurdish. Now, the two explosions in Ankara, apparently set off by suicide bombers, they went as tens of thousands of people had gathered for this march called by the progressive trade unions, the party, the Democratic Party, and others. And the marchers were demanding that the Erdogan regime conclude a ceasefire and make peace with the PKK. And the PKK had just declared that it was going to have a ceasefire and honor the ceasefire if the regime didn't attack them. But all these suspicious things happen because usually the cops are everywhere. If you think they're bad here, usually the cops are everywhere at these demonstrations, and they claim to know everything that's going on, yet nobody was where the bombs went off. None of the cops were where the bombs went off. And then they went in with water cannon and tear gas and stuff that kept the people who were coming to rescue the ones who were dying. So what happened was the people got furious at the government. I mean, you might think, what the government probably had in mind when something like this happened. They immediately charged actually the leftists of doing this to themselves to get sympathy. But then they kind of realized that wasn't working, so they said, the Islamic State did it, and they're going to find them. But that's what they did. But there were demonstrations immediately. So you can see how this is. 100 people got killed in the bombing. Then right away, the same day, there were demonstrations throughout all the cities of Turkey and in Europe too. And this is the two main progressive trade union confederations called general strikes for Monday and Tuesday. This is a demonstration on Monday in Diyarbakir. It's both to mourn the people who died and to protest the government. And the target is the government. They called it, they said, Erdogan's killer. That was like one of the main slogans. And they demonstrated throughout Europe. There's a lot of Turkish and a lot of Kurdish immigrants working throughout Europe. Actually, most are in Germany, but these pictures are, and they had demonstrations there, but I didn't find a good picture of one. So here's one from Paris, and here's one in London. And there's Erdogan again. And that's the Prime Minister. And there's that. So, okay, so I'm just going to finish up now by saying that while these elections that are coming up on November 1st reflect the sentiment of the masses, they cannot in themselves resolve the question of power. In 1980, After a decade of fighting between the fascists and revolutionary groups, there was a military coup that took power in Germany and stayed there, in Turkey, and stayed there for a long time. The Turkish police, intelligence services, and a massive armed forces with nearly 700,000 personnel and close ties to both the U.S. and German armed forces are still the power behind the electoral facade. But the Turkish, and especially the Kurdish regions of Turkey, the people are mobilized for struggle and in some cases are armed. So we have to just watch the struggle that goes on there. Our solidarity is with the mass organizations, with the Kurdish freedom fighters, and with the communist organizations inside Turkey who are fighting against this government and against U.S. imperialism in that region of the world. Thank you. Within the Turkish prisons, there have always been a lot of activity. In fact, in the last 10 years, one of the things that they were fighting against is now they're trying to isolate the prisoners like they do in the United States in the prisons, whereas before they would put all the political prisoners in the same place, so they'd immediately set up organizations. And one of the things they did, by the way, was translate a lot of the articles and books even that our comrade Sam Marcy wrote, the Turkish communists in the prisons in the 1980s, I think it was. They would translate Sam's works into Turkish, which, of course, I don't know if we had anybody here who reads it. And we had a comrade who lived in Boston for a while who was a Turkish revolutionary and who was a prisoner for a while. And she's in Turkey now. And we hope she's going to write something for us. So that's one point. Another thing is what Nick said about the intervention of the Turkish capitalist government inside Syria was the part that I cut off when they told me if my 15 minutes was up. So I want to thank him for adding that. I would say that we always have to remember, I mean, I think, what you gave the history, but I think that's true of every capitalist ruling class, the imperialist ruling classes in Europe. I mean, why is France a country or Germany is a country? Some section of that was one of those people who more or less spoke something like the same language, won the wars and set up a king or an empire, and then they made everybody else do it their way. And that became a nation, and then became capitalist nations. So these are nations, they represent the capitalist class of each of these countries, and they have they use their nationalist drive and a nationalist ideology, or in some cases religious ideology, in order to expand the interests of that capitalist class. And that's true in Turkey too, even though right now it has to be subordinate to the European and U.S. capitalists, but it has ambitions to expand into Syria, into Central Asia. But it's the capitalist class that wants that and gains it and imposes that ideology on some of the population. But there's a working class that fights against it and is not nationalist and is internationalist and unites Kurds and Turkish workers and other workers from the whole region in a struggle against capitalism. And we, as communists here, should never forget that. It's never Turkey did this or something. It's the Turkish capitalist class that's carrying out a policy, and maybe it imposes it on part of the population. That's why they have things like the gray wolves, but it's the capitalist class and not the people in general. And Kurds and Turks unite in a lot of these revolutionary organizations, and I hope they do, to get rid of the present government and put in a real revolutionary one over there. It's a difficult time for the world workers' movement, but it's got to start somewhere, and we'll keep our eye on what's going on there. Thank you.